Most people believe that seeing too much is an advantage, that perceiving what others do not perceive is a gift, a superior intelligence, a silent blessing. But Carl Jung, in his decades spent delving into the deepest layers of the human psyche, understood something almost no one wants to accept. Those who see beyond appearances are not rewarded with clarity. They are condemned to a loneliness that has no translation, because seeing what others ignore is not a privilege. It is a weight that no one around you can carry with you. And Machiavelli, centuries earlier, had described exactly the same phenomenon with a coldness that still unsettles today. Whoever observes human nature as it truly is can never again pretend they did not see. You notice the pauses before the lies. You notice the smile that does not reach the eyes. You notice when praise hides envy, when concern disguises control, when affection has a schedule. You notice that people say one thing with their mouths and something completely different with their bodies. And while the world around you keeps functioning within its comfortable illusions, you exist in a strange place, where real communication happens in the silences, in the micro-movements, in the contradictions that no one else notices. This is not paranoia. It is not hypersensitivity. It is heightened awareness. And Jung explained why this awareness hurts so much, because the common human mind needs illusion in order to function. When you begin to see through it, you do not become more intelligent. You become unbearably alone. Think of an apparently ordinary dinner. The family gathered, the table set, conversations flowing on a polite surface. While everyone eats peacefully, you register, without meaning to, the father who interrupts the mother for the third time without noticing. The sister who pulls her child by the arm a little harder than the situation demands. The brother-in-law who laughs at a joke, but whose eyes remain tense. The silence of an aunt when a certain name is mentioned. No one else notices. They all keep chewing. But you have just watched in 3 minutes an entire movie of unspoken conflicts that have dragged on for decades. And when someone asks why you are quiet, you make up that you are tired. Because explaining what you just saw would be asking that whole table to collapse. So you swallow it, and you take the reading inside, and it is this systematic swallowing year after year that slowly forms what Jung would call the weight of the observer. The classic mistake is to believe that this lucidity is a flaw, that you need to be less intense, not read too much into things, trust people more. Modern culture venerates naivety and calls it optimism. It punishes perception and calls it negativity. But Jung never believed in that theater. For him, most people spend their entire lives sleeping with their eyes open, protected by a psychological fog that prevents reality from hurting too much. Those who see through this fog are not abnormal. They are simply people in whom the collective defense mechanism has failed. And this failure, however painful it may be, is the first symptom of something rare, a soul beginning to wake up. Then comes the second layer, the one almost no one has the courage to look at. Jung said that every human being builds from childhood a psychological mask that he called the persona. The persona is what you show the world in order to be accepted, hired, loved, tolerated. It is not conscious falsehood. It is an engineering of survival. You learned when you were small that certain parts of you generated praise and others generated rejection. So you stored the rejected ones in an internal basement and began to display only the approved ones. The child who laughed too loudly learned to be more restrained. The one who asked too many questions learned to be silent. The one who felt too much learned to perform balance. And over time, this performance became so automatic that you yourself forgot you were acting. The problem is that the highly perceptive person doesn't just see their own mask. They see everyone else's masks. And they see when the masks slip. They see the exact moment the manager performs concern while calculating layoffs. They see the relative who smiles at dinner and scoffs behind their back. They see the friend who celebrates your victory with a trace of bitterness in the corner of their voice. It's not malice on their part to see this. It's that other people's masks were never made for someone with X-ray vision. They were made for other masks. And here comes the antithesis that Jung would whisper in his office with the calm of someone delivering a definitive diagnosis. It's not that people lie to you. It's that they lie to themselves first, and then offer you an edited version of that lie as if it were their truth. You're not being deceived. You're being shielded from the emotional fragility they can't sustain on their own. And that's the exhaustion almost no one can explain. That feeling of coming home from a family dinner, a work meeting, a get-together with friends, and sensing you're carrying an extra 10 pounds on your soul. This isn't introversion. It isn't social fatigue. It's the exhaustion of performing a diplomatic version of yourself while simultaneously processing every mask that dropped in front of you. You weren't just taking part in the conversation. You were reading 3 layers of it in silence. And that reading has a cost. Every perception has a cost. And that's exactly why so many people with this sensitivity end up falling ill in environments where no one else seems to. They aren't living in the same environment as others. They're living in its subtext. That's why I prepared the Código do Despertar for you. If this exhaustion of perceiving too much has followed you for years, if you've even doubted your own sanity for seeing what no one else wants to see, this material isn't motivational. It isn't cheap illusion. It's an inner map based on Carl Jung's psychology, divided into 60 days of daily lessons, with keys, questions, and declarations that lead you from silent restlessness to clear direction. It's not about stopping perception. It's about stopping being destroyed by what you perceive. The access link is in the first pinned comment below this video. If you recognize this pain, write "I see" in the comments, not as a slogan, as a mark of the moment you decided to stop pretending you didn't see. Jung called individuation the process by which a person stops being a reflection of collective expectations and begins to become what they truly are. It sounds beautiful said like that, in a watered-down self-help book. But in practice, individuation is one of the most brutal journeys a human being can undergo, because it demands that you dismantle, one by one, the layers of mask you spent your whole life building, and every layer you remove, someone around you complains, someone misses the previous version, someone accuses you of having changed, someone tries to call you back to the old character, because that's the role in which that person learned to fit you. The path of individuation, therefore, is not lonely because you are cold or arrogant. It is lonely because most people fell in love with your character, not with you. When you abandon the character, the audience disperses. And that is not a moral tragedy. It is a structural cleansing. Jung understood that a large portion of our relationships are not based on love. They are based on unconscious psychological contracts. I offer you the version of myself that accommodates you, and you offer me the version of yourself that accommodates me, and we both protect each other from the truth. The day you break the contract, the other feels as if you have betrayed something sacred. You didn't betray. You simply stopped sacrificing your soul to keep someone else's mask intact. And here the solitude of waking up reveals its true anatomy. It is not the solitude of someone who was abandoned. It is the solitude of someone who refuses to keep lying out of politeness. You sit at the same table with the same people as always, but you realize you can no longer laugh at the same shallow jokes. You try to take an interest in the conversations that once filled your week, and you feel a fine, almost imperceptible, but irreversible disgust. It is not that these people have gotten worse. It is that you have ceased to be useful as a mirror for their alienation. And deep down, that is what they miss most about you. Not your change, but the fact that your presence now forces each of them to remember what they are avoiding facing. And there is an even more uncomfortable detail in this phase. You begin to realize that many people around you do not want you to improve. Not consciously, of course. No one wakes up in the morning formulating the thought of sabotaging someone they love. But there is a silent psychological mechanism that Jung identified with precision. Each evolution of yours forces the other to confront their own stagnation. When you start setting boundaries, those who benefited from your lack of boundaries react. When you start speaking your mind, those who got used to your silence take offense. When you start choosing yourself, those who had you as a resource available 24 hours a day feel abandoned, and in an almost invisible movement, they try to pull you back to the old place. Not with violence, with guilt, with phrases like, "You've changed," "You're acting strange," as "You're different," said in a tone that feigns concern but carries underneath a plea. Go back to being the one who served me better. Recognizing this dynamic is painful, but liberating. Because those who truly love you celebrate your growth even if they lose access to your former version. The cruel part of this process is that no one warns you. No one tells you when individuation begins that you will lose people you loved, that there will be nights when your bed will seem larger and emptier than the room itself, that you will look at your past with a mixture of gratitude and disgust, because now you see clearly how much you paid to belong to places that were never yours. Jung said that individuation is the only path to a true life, but he never promised it would be comfortable. He did promise that it would be real. And reality, for a soul that has been anesthetized for decades, burns like iodine on an open wound. And it is exactly at this point that Machiavelli enters the psychological scene, even though he wrote centuries before Jung. Because while Jung delved into the internal structure of the soul, Machiavelli mapped, with an almost surgical coldness, the external structure of human behavior. He was not the caricatured cynic that common sense invented. He was a relentless observer of patterns, and his most uncomfortable teaching is this: never judge a person by what they say. Judge them by what they repeatedly do, especially when they think no one is paying attention. Words are performance. Action is confession. And most people live deluded because they insist on hearing the words of others as if they were contracts when, in fact, they were never more than packaging. There is a scene that repeats in nearly everyone's life, but only the observer records it in real time. Someone promises to be present at an important moment, and on the day they don't show up, offering an excuse that sounds reasonable. A few days later, the same person fails again in another context, with another equally reasonable excuse. Months go by, and the third absence occurs. Individually, each excuse is acceptable. Together, they are a silent confession. That person does not prioritize you, they never will. And while most people keep asking for another chance, the Machiavellian observer has already understood. He stops demanding presence. He adjusts the relationship. He repositions. He doesn't necessarily cut ties, but he never again deposits emotional currency in a place where it has proven to sink. The person who learns to read the world through this lens stops being surprised by betrayals, not because they become paranoid, but because they stop denying the signs. They notice, weeks in advance, that someone is drifting away by the microtone of their voice, the delay in replies, the absence of curious questions about their life. They notice, months before a partnership crumbles, that the business partner is already making moves that prepare the exit. They notice, in small gestures, when a relationship has lost its axis, even if both still pretend to hold the pieces together. This is not toxic mistrust. It is strategic lucidity. And it is here that Jung and Machiavelli, coming from seemingly opposite worlds, meet. Both understood that the truth about a human being is never in what they project. It is in the pattern they repeat when they believe they are safe. The beginner observer's mistake is to use this clarity as an accusation, to point a finger, try to convince others of what they see, try to prove someone's hidden intentions to those who prefer to remain blind. Jung would have said that this is a childish attempt to force the collective consciousness to wake up. Machiavelli would have said with a melancholy smile that this is politically disastrous. The person who sees too much must learn a rare discipline, to see in silence, to keep the reading to themselves, to adjust the strategy, to let each person reveal themselves in their own time, because human nature, when not interrupted, always confesses, and it is up to the observer to be attentive at the moment it confesses, without needing to denounce anything. The power of perception lies not in exposing, but in positioning. If you have made it this far, and something inside your chest recognized these descriptions as if they were descriptions of your own life, hold this moment close. It was for you that I prepared the code of awakening. It is not a course, not a miracle, not motivation. It is a daily path based on Jung to transform your perception into sovereignty. Access is in the first pinned comment, and if you postpone, you will keep knowing everything and living little. Choose today, because this is what almost no one understands about the highly perceptive mind. It does not rest. While an ordinary person can leave an environment and mentally switch off, the observer takes the entire environment inside. They replay the conversation, revisit the facial expression of that colleague, Question the intention behind that seemingly innocent phrase. Cross-reference data. Compare behaviors. Reorganize the puzzle. It is not obsession. It is processing. Their brain was trained from very early on to interpret the world in multiple simultaneous layers, probably because at some point in their personal history, understanding the subtext was literally a matter of emotional survival. Many relentless observers come from childhoods where they had to learn to read their parents' moods like one reads a weather forecast, where they had to decode heavy silences to know whether they would be ignored or attacked, where they became experts at anticipating the emotional climate of a home even before opening the door. Jung would say that such a child developed, out of necessity, a sensitivity that most adults will never achieve. But the price of that sensitivity, when not integrated in adulthood, is a chronic vigilance. It is an inability to let one's guard down. It is the body permanently locked in a silent mode of alert that no one around can see. And even more painful is the loneliness of feeling that everything you say needs to be explained 3 times, that your intuitions seem like exaggerations to those who don't see what you see, that your concerns, when you try to share them, sound paranoid to those who prefer the comfort of denial. Over time, you learn to filter what you say, to hide half of what you perceive, to swallow your internal warnings because you're tired of being called dramatic, and each swallowed warning turns into a stone inside your chest. Jung had a name for this: the shadow. Not just the shadow of what is ugly in us, but the shadow of everything that had to be kept hidden so that coexistence could be possible. Swallowed anger, censored perception, hidden ambition, ignored boundaries. Things kept hidden like that do not die. They leak, as inexplicable exhaustion, as impatience with those you love, as a grey sadness that appears on Sunday afternoons, and you don't know where it comes from. There is also a physical symptom that almost no one associates with this condition, but Jung sensed it. The body of the relentless observer ages on the inside at a different pace. Your hands may be at rest, but your chest remains tense. Sleep comes, but in shallow layers. You wake up tired without having made any effort, because your nighttime mind kept processing conversations, re-editing scenes, trying to fit that person's last strange remark into their larger pattern of behavior. It's like living with a second brain working in silence, even while the first one tries to rest. And over time, this silent exhaustion gets interpreted by ordinary doctors as generalized anxiety, mild depression, burnout. Clinical names that describe the symptoms but never reach the root. The root is something else. You're tired of carrying alone a level of awareness that no one around you perceives exists. Jung's task was never to erase this shadow. It was to integrate it, to accept that it is a legitimate part of the soul, to bring to light what society taught you to hide, and to give those contents back the right to exist. The person who integrates the shadow stops being a hostage to it, stops being sabotaged by their own unconscious, stops acting contrary to what they desire, stops being exhausted from maintaining an impeccable image while dying inside. Integrating the shadow does not make you shadowy, it makes you whole. And the whole person is the one who can finally walk without the weight of 2 identities, the public and the secret. Here lies the next stage, and it is the most delicate. Because a person who begins to see everything if they do not educate themselves emotionally runs a silent risk, turning lucidity into superiority. They start looking at others with a hint of disdain. They start categorizing who is asleep and who is awake. They start feeling intellectually above the masses. And here Jung would pause for a long, almost melancholic moment to remind us that this arrogance is just another mask, perhaps the most sophisticated of all. It is the ego taking refuge in perception, just as it once took refuge in approval. It is not evolution, it is displacement. You traded the hunger for acceptance, for the hunger to feel special. And the second is quieter, but equally a prison. The mature path is different. It's realizing that most people aren't being malicious, they're being human, at the level of consciousness they've managed to reach. They wear their masks because they were taught to believe that without a mask they are unlovable. They lie to themselves because the truth would be too painful to carry without internal structure. They hurt without knowing because they never learned to deal with their own pain. That doesn't obligate you to endure everything. It doesn't obligate you to stay in relationships that wear you down. But it does obligate you to a new choice, to see without judging, to withdraw without hating, to decide without being contaminated. Machiavelli, whom so many accuse of being cold, offers a powerful clue here. He asserted, in essence, that understanding human nature does not mean despising it. It means stopping demanding from it what it cannot deliver. If you expect loyalty from someone who has never shown loyalty to anything, you will suffer. If you expect transparency from someone who survives by wearing masks, you will suffer. If you expect depth from someone who has only learned to live on the surface, you will suffer. The pain doesn't come from human nature, it comes from our unrealistic expectations of it. The mature observer adjusts expectations. He doesn't cut off affections. He adjusts expectations. And in doing so, he stops being a victim of patterns that were already predictable. At this point, perception stops being condemnation and becomes wisdom. You begin to relate to the world like someone relates to the weather, understanding seasons, predicting rains, knowing when to take shelter and when to expose yourself. You no longer personalize others' winters. You no longer feel hurt by the natural coldness of someone who never learned to warm themselves. You no longer confuse immaturity with malice. And above all, you stop expecting the other person to undertake the inner journey that only you have decided to make. Each one walks at their own pace, and accepting this is one of the most compassionate acts a awakened soul can perform. Real compassion here is not accepting everything. It's understanding what each one can offer and stopping demanding miracles from those who are still asleep. If every sentence so far seems to describe your inner life, stop, breathe. Acknowledge what you're feeling. You are not a rare case. You are a postponed case, and postponing any longer won't bring you any inner peace. The Código do Despertar exists precisely for you to cross this passage without losing your way. It's 60 days, one lesson per day, with questions, keys, and declarations inspired by the deep psychology of Carl Jung. It's not for you to learn about Jung. It's for you to apply Jung within yourself, in the exact place where the pain lives. The access is in the first pinned comment of this video. If you close this tab now, tomorrow you will still know too much and live too little, and the distance between what you know and what you live is the only real hell. The choice is yours. Make it today. And we arrive at the point that changes everything, at what Jung would call, with his surgical serenity, inner sovereignty, and what Machiavelli would describe as the true form of power, the one that does not depend on an audience. The sovereign person is not the one who shouts the loudest, is not the one who dominates a room, is not the one who flaunts achievements. It is the one who has reached a silent state where the validation of others has lost its weight, where the opinion of another is merely information, not a verdict, where solitude has ceased to be absence and has become one's own presence. This person doesn't need to prove anything, doesn't need to convince anyone, doesn't need to perform balance because they simply are. And here is the final inversion. The solitude you so feared was not the problem. It was the portal. It was the inner space that needed to be emptied so that something greater could fill it. Without this solitude, you would remain dependent on the gaze of others. Without this incomprehension, you would remain diluted in voices that were never yours. Without this painful lucidity, you would continue sleeping comfortably in a life that only seemed to be yours. Every loss along this journey was, in truth, a cleansing. Every person who walked away made room for you to breathe deeper. Every mask that fell revealed features that had been waiting to be recognized. You did not lose. You were returned to yourself. And it is here that Jung would whisper the final truth. He who masters his own mind no longer needs to master anything else. Because one who has anchored themselves in their own center can no longer be displaced by opinions, by praise, by attacks, by rejections. The storm continues to rage outside, but it no longer moves you. And from that point on, your perception ceases to be a burden and becomes a compass. You use what you see to choose whom you live with, what you accept, where you go. You no longer expose what you see. You position yourself based on what you see. And that changes absolutely everything, because an observer who positions themselves in the right place is practically untouchable. Inner sovereignty in practice manifests itself in small and definitive things. You stop needing to reply to messages immediately to prove you care. You stop needing to justify your choices to people who would never make the same ones. You stop engaging in arguments whose only purpose was to test your patience. You stop accepting meetings, dates, invitations, conversations that drain your energy without giving anything back. And no one understands where this new firmness came from. Some admire it in silence, others start calling you arrogant, distant, changed. And you realize with a newfound calm that these accusations are merely the language of those who have lost power over you. The sovereign does not explain himself. He watches the accusation arrive and moves on. The silence which once hurt now sustains. The absence of approval which once wounded now liberates. The distance from environments that no longer fit you ceases to be a source of guilt and becomes proof that you finally have a center. Being the lonely genius was never about being abandoned. It was about being the only one able to see without needing the group's consensus. And there is a rare dignity in inhabiting this place without trying to convince anyone of it. The sovereign does not recruit followers. He simply walks, and whoever has eyes will see. Whoever does not will move on, and both paths are legitimate. What remains of this journey is this. You can close this video now and go back to pretending you don't know what you know. You can go back to swallowing warnings, go back to explaining yourself to those who have already decided not to understand you. Go back to bending yourself in the name of a peace that was always alone, you who sustained it. Or you can accept once and for all that lucidity has come to stay, and that the only way out is not to flee from it, but to walk with it as one walks with a flame burning inside the chest. There is no going back. There is only the next step. The illusion that protected you has just been exposed, and from now on everything you do or fail to do will be, for the first time, a choice that is truly yours. Choose well.